Welcome back, everybody, into Bill's Chat. I am Josh McCarty. With me tonight, as always, is Luca. Luca, how are you doing on this WrestleMania weekend, Sunday night that we are recording on?
Well, it's a fun one. WrestleMania weekend, of course, first and foremost. I will say the Sunday afternoon that was the Sabre season basically coming to an end in a very weird way. Weird, not weird, actually perfect for how this season's been. All these things, it's just one of those things where I'm happy to be sitting down here. We're going to talk some Bills because it's almost going to feel normal because this weekend's been a strange one all up and down the place with WrestleMania now happening as I literally watched John Cena run into the ring. So overall, yeah, I'm glad we're going to be talking some Bills football because everything else is chaos in this world with the eclipse even tomorrow, Josh. Or if you're listening to this on Monday, it is today. If you listen to this past the eclipse as you live in Buffalo or wherever you might be, it happened, but there's chaos everywhere. And yet we are just here to sit down and talk about some Bills.
Speaking of chaos, some might describe what happened to the Bills last week as chaos, Luca, because you and I recorded last week a wide receiver episode outlining all of our favorite wide receiver prospects in the draft. By the way, that is still out there anywhere you want to listen to Spotify, Apple, YouTube. And while I will say at the time that we recorded that, we anticipated that any wide receiver the Bills would take would be running alongside Stefon Diggs. The truth of the matter now is Stefon Diggs is now a former Buffalo Bill. So the conversation changes, but our love for these prospects very much stays the same. And we would encourage you to go back and look at that. If your brain is on, now what do the Bills do at wide receiver? But Luca, you and I have not been on the air together since this Stefon Diggs thing happened. And quite candidly, life hit me pretty strongly in the middle of last week. So I would say that you and I really haven't had a whole lot of time to even talk about the Stefon Diggs trade outside of a few messages back and forth. So let's just get into it, Luca. I put out a quick little 20-minute video reacting to it on our YouTube page, Bill's Chat Quick Chat. Highly recommend going to listen to it. But where were you when you saw the trade? On a scale of 1 to 10, how shocked were you? And just let me know what you were thinking in that moment.
I will say, when the trade happened, Josh, my work day was chaos in its own right. Things were not going well in the work world that I live in currently. And I was in phone calls and meetings. I was literally on the phone as in a meeting to discuss the same project with two different issues going on. It was chaos. And all of a sudden I look down at my personal phone and I see the alert. And I I can't tell you how funny it was watching the virtual meeting I was in and audible sighs happen during that, as well as the person on the other phone just stopped talking mid conversation to see what the heck just happened, because I imagine it was that Diggs trade. And then on top of it, myself just going, what, really? And it was like the world had stopped professionally, so that most of us in this work world where we were at that point tried to figure out, okay, what just happened? Stefon Diggs just got traded to the Texans. What is it for? What's happening? It's only a future second. Okay. Like it was one of those things where, of course, it was the classic when it rains, it pours. And naturally, with how my professional life was at that moment in time, that had to have been when the Diggs trade happened. And it was the initial reaction to it truly was, holy bleeping shit, really just a future second, and we gave up picks, so on and so forth. And that was before I could even mentally process kind of why the trade probably had happened, what's going on, all of these things. Holy crap. All of this. It was just one of those things where I will remember it probably for some time until the draft, just because of where life was and all of these things. So yeah, just chaos on its own. It's chaos right now in the ring. Sorry, it's quite
Wow.
distracting, honestly.
We made a questionable choice to start recording during the main event of WrestleMania, but that is holy cow. Okay, so yeah, this is getting good. Um, my first reaction when I saw it was I actually got a text from a buddy of mine. Like I have a text group, not even Bills fans, just more like fantasy football related, but they know I'm Bills fan. And it said Diggs trade to Houston. And for whatever reason, my first reaction was good. And this was right the day after that Diggs had chimed in on a Robert Griffin III message about, does Josh Allen
Yep.
need Stefon Diggs? And Diggs is and some person was like, Diggs helped Josh Allen, but Diggs isn't essential to Josh Allen's success. And then Diggs's response was, "You sure?" And it just kind of felt like, come on, man. Like after a year and what felt like a year and a half of condescending remarks, passive aggressive things on social media, kind of going out of your way to not like 100% say you want to be a Buffalo Bill, pretending like the rest of us are crazy for calling you out and questioning where your allegiance was, despite the fact that your brother is saying things like, we got to get 14 out of Buffalo, things like that. I think it was time for the Bills to move on. I was surprised it happened this quickly. I actually, funny enough, when that tweet came out, I quote tweeted it saying, Luka and I have been saying for a while, the Bills need 2 wide receivers in this draft, and this is why, or something to that effect. And then our
Yeah.
friends at Air Raid came in and said, um, whatever happens, and look, before I even get this out, I need you all to know I am not piling on Air Raid because we shared a brain with them on one of these things. Whatever happens, Diggs will be here for the next 2 years. And I just said, I don't see it that way. I think that what'll happen is that next offseason, they'll do what they did with Trey White. They'll make it a June 1st release and they'll just get Diggs out of town at that point. I think the relationship will have gone so far left by then that it'll be time to move on. Little did either of us know, us, Air Raid, any of us involved in these conversations, that the next day would bring us a Stefon Diggs trade to the Houston Texans. I'm with you on the second round pick being jarring, but Luka, Amari Cooper went for a 5th round pick several years ago. He was 2 years younger than Diggs. Keenan Allen this very offseason went for a 4th round pick.
Yeah.
So I think when you line it up that way, I think it does make the future second round pick a little more palatable. But I do think one jarring aspect of that is there is nothing the Bills are getting from the Stefon Diggs trade that will help them in 2024. Not one single thing. They're losing him as a player on their roster. They're losing an additional $3 million in cap space. And the only thing they get out of it is a pick in next year's draft that in theory they could use as ammunition to enhance their position in this year's draft. So that is the one way it could help them. But then they're also, for whatever it's worth, losing a 6th round pick because they had to do a sweetener to get that second round pick. I think that's where my main concern comes in is you mentioned this a little bit off the air, the timing of this. Free agency has gone by, and it's not just the Gabe Davises who the Bills were not going to bring back, but guys like Mike Williams were just out there several weeks ago, and the Bills are no longer, obviously able to get him. And the list of names is like Tyler Boyd, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham. I think in the last 2 case, much more name than game at this point. How concerned are you about the state of the Bills wide receiver group, and how fixable is it with the resources the Bills have left this offseason before 2024 kicks off?
The current state of the receiver room right now is it's not bad. It's just below average right now, though. And any Bills fan out there that wants to try to talk themselves into something else otherwise, I think is delusional in a way. I think it's ridiculous to say. It, as much as you can talk about Diggs, and I will say I think it was Tim Graham, even as he put out the other comments about the Diggs Allen relationship on a podcast that kind of went viral, of course. The stat that he put in there, I think almost held more weight to kind of the real situation with Diggs and probably what Bean and McDermott and everyone was evaluating when eventually pulling the trigger on moving him out. And the fact of the matter was, when that comment, when all that stuff that he had went viral with, as Tim Graham mentioned perfectly, that was when it was still superstar Stefon Diggs. And early in the season last year, he was exploding like we would all expect. And I think he had something like 800 and so yards, 7 touchdowns. on 80 something catches. It was something in that realm. And then the final 10 games of the season, he had only 40 something targets for 400 and something yards and 1 touchdown. I wish I had the exact numbers in front of me. But we just weren't even sure where this conversation was going to go. Josh, peek behind the curtain for everyone else. And overall, what Bean and them did, and this is kind of where, after the emotional reaction to the trade, this is where I immediately went, and I think others have been. So this is kind of how you look at with the receiver room. They looked at it where, the juice was no longer worth the squeeze. It was no longer worth the problems that were coming with Diggs. And look, whether Diggs had issues with Allen, with the organization and things like that, with how they were handling stuff, what direction they were going, whether that's warranted or not, in whatever capacity it is, you're never going to get sided with over Josh Allen if the predicament ever becomes you versus him. And on top of it, it's just, you better be producing in order to make those complaints and everything else warranted to the point where they will be put up with. And as you had put it, the Bills were probably looking for what is known as a blue chip return. Whether a future second is someone's definition of a blue chip, it's a second round pick regardless. You can say what you say about this. I will say 2025 draft is not one that I hold in high regards. I look at the forecast and I go, that pick better be moving out as quick as it came in, because I am not a fan of that draft, nor do I want to be taking a player with that if you can get something else right now for it. But overall, you're still getting something valuable for it, with getting the value of Diggs out the door in order to do something. Backtracking now to your original question, bringing it back to the receiver room now you're in a situation where you need to do something. It's clear as day that they're going to be doing something with that position group specifically in this upcoming draft, whether it's a true blue chip or true high-end blue chip receiver, or receiver by community situation, and maybe take a Green Bay approach on this, where they're really loading up on a ton of young receiving talent over this year and next year, whatever it might be. Overall, they are going to do something and they're going to address it. But I do feel like, regardless of if they attack it in the draft this year and how they do it, realistically, it feels like a partial throwaway in that receiver group, in that world, where you are going to now have to lean on Josh Allen's shoulders more so to try to get something out of this season in particular. And the draft is not about this season. It's about the future. And everything should always have the future in mind. That's why you make this Diggs trade when you did, and you retain all the salary and all the cap, because then next year there's even a serious avenue where the Bills can have 60 plus million in cap space, and you are free to really attack things however you want to. So overall, I don't like where the receiver room is, just to be quite frank, with the Bills currently. And it's not because I don't like Khalil Shakir, and it's not that I don't hope, or I don't have hope, that Justin Shorter maybe could be someone of productive value to this team this upcoming season, or maybe in the next couple of years. Those things. I still think Curtis Samuel was a good signing, but it's not anything that moves the ticker where I go, I'm still comfortable with our receiving group. If at the end of the day, we're in that situation where Josh Allen needs to drive down the field to, score, we are in a worse position with what it's currently at right now than what it was last year. That is the bottom line. That's how it is, and I do find it funny where, for once, whenever national sports media is on, I agree with the points where it's hard to see where things are going at this moment in time, when the top 2 receivers that were on the team last year, regardless of how you feel about them, are no longer on the team. Like, that is something that is eye-opening. If you are someone that's on the outside looking in, you go, wait a second. Eric Moulds and Pierlix Price are both not on this team all of a sudden? Wait a second. Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis are no longer on this. Who are our boundary receivers now? What are we doing? That it's a question. Like, it's a legitimate question, and you're delusional to think anything beyond it's a below average receiver room that clearly they're going to try to address, hopefully in an aggressive manner, coming up.
Yeah. And, I was vocal about happy they moved on from Diggs. I think it was time. But You're right. Like the absolute like simplest way to put it is we've spent the majority of this offseason and last offseason, by the way, saying they need to weaponize Josh Allen, get him more passing targets to throw to. And so far this offseason, they've gotten rid of Gabe Davis and gotten rid of Stefon Diggs. It reminds me of that plane, trains, and automobiles scene where it's like, you're going the wrong way. The idea was to get more, not less. They did bring in Curtis Samuel. I understand that. But I do think maybe they have somehow boxed themselves in to needing to take a wide receiver. I'm interested in getting into that conversation with you here in a little bit. I do want to kind of peel back the layers on this Stefon Diggs conversation, though, because it's such a weird dynamic. The way it started, Stefon Diggs gets traded to Buffalo. And if you've been a Bills fan for any amount of time, even dating back to when LaShawn McCoy became a Buffalo Bill, your first instinct is probably to think, oh, is he unhappy about that? Because Josh Allen wasn't Josh Allen at that point in time. Josh Allen was just basically coming off of his second year where he was okay, kind of imploded in a playoff game, and you still weren't really sure what you had, even though things seemed to be going in a positive direction. And it was still Buffalo. It wasn't like it was New York or LA or Chicago. So your first thought was like, oh man, is he going to nix that trade? Because the last offseason, it felt like that's exactly what Antonio Brown did. Thank God. And so we get through that. And then I hate to draw this comparison, but if you're old enough, and I want to say before I make this comparison, I'm not comparing Stefon Diggs to Terrell Owens as far as like off field distraction stuff, okay? Because that's not fair. Terrell Owens had a lot longer list of issues than some of the perceived issues Stefon Diggs has. But if you're old enough to remember when Terrell Owens forced his way out of San Francisco, got traded to Baltimore, nixed the trade, and then ultimately found his way to Philadelphia with Donovan McNabb. Donovan McNabb was kind of like, he was better than Josh Allen was before Josh Allen got Diggs. But Donovan McNabb was kind of like good, but not quite sure if he was a great quarterback yet. And Terrell Owens was like really good, but like, is he a locker room cancer? And Luka, for like the first year and handful of games, it felt like the league had made a gigantic mistake letting those two find each other. They were unguardable. And it wasn't until Terrell Owens had a leg injury that cost him the rest of his season. He was able to get back in time for the Super Bowl. They looked like they couldn't be stopped. A lot of the same similarities with Allen and Diggs, where right off the bat, it just clicks and it's beautiful. And it looks like the best wide receiver quarterback combination in the league. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking to yourself, this is a guy, Terrell Owens, Stefon Diggs, different levels, unhappy before. He's great when things are good now. What happens when we hit some adversity? And in both cases, you saw Terrell Owens and Donovan McNabb go out of their way to like let you know how close they were. And Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen, the exact same thing. The bromance, the Sports Illustrated for Kids cover, the we're playing Warzone together every night. We're working out together. It felt like, it felt like they would play together for free, like long lost brothers, didn't even know they had this brother that existed. And all of a sudden I found my best friend in life. And it was fantastic. It's everything as a sports fan you want out of your team. And somewhere along the way, you started seeing little cracks in the foundation, similar to McNabb and Owens. There was a sideline reaction with McNabb and Owens in Pittsburgh. They had a blow up. The media made a big deal about it. Like, aha, is this Terrell Owens being Terrell Owens? And they kind of, brushed it off and they had some fun with it. But you started to notice like, oh, a couple more cracks here and there. And eventually that one imploded. This one, a lot longer to implode, but I just find it interesting that it eventually did implode, Luka, because it feels like somewhere between the day that Cincinnati Bengals playoff game kicked off and last Wednesday when the trade happened, it went from Allen and Diggs are inseparable. They're best friends. They're on the field in Detroit on Thanksgiving, telling each other how much they love each other and how thankful they are for each other. 2 months later, having the infamous blow up in Cincinnati. And now, and I say this confidently, feels like that neither one of them want to play with the other one.
Yeah, the final point there, it felt like that's where it is. It is funny because I don't know. through what media outlet it happened initially, but prior to the Diggs trade actually happening, the other thing that happened was uh, Allen reported on what receivers he liked in the draft. And I don't know if you remember that or not. And I remember saying it. Allen used to reply to comments like that all the time where I got my guy, I like Diggs, blah, blah, blah. Like he used to do things like that all the time where if a reporter's like, oh, would you want to play with Rob Gronkowski? And he'd be like, oh, Dawson's my guy. I look for Dawson in the red zone. Like he almost went out of his way whether he felt great about Rob Gronkowski didn't matter because he just made sure that it was like, well, all I'm thinking about is who I have. And he would do that with Diggs as well, right? When people would try to even say, is there a rift between you two? Is something going on? In the past, he's my brother, blah, blah, blah. Like he would always go to bat for them and everything like that. Well, then I can't remember where it happened or what had happened or through what media outlet, whatever it was. But I remember reading something where Allen essentially uh, out out loud said what receivers he would like to have play with him in this upcoming draft. And, like, of course, everyone blew up because Xavier Legette was one of them and so on and so forth. And I didn't find that to be odd. It's just answering the question, who do you like? Because there's the conversation with this draft, of course, one of them is wide receivers. But he did not at any point mention Diggs or he likes the guys he has. He even mentioned, he didn't mention Shakir either. So it's not like it's just he's targeting Diggs here. But overall, it seemed like he answered that question in a different capacity. And then as you've put it there, things appeared for a little while now where it's like it doesn't seem all hunky-dory. It doesn't seem like that relationship is as smooth as that picture over your right shoulder.
I
It's
got to
one of
change
those.
this. I keep forgetting about that. Like this has to go now.
Yeah, it
Ah.
is. It is. Things aren't as good as that anymore. And overall, when the Diggs tweet happened that you referred to,
Yeah. Can I make that
the,
look like Kincaid?
yeah, good luck with that one.
Yeah.
When the tweet happened where he's like, "You
Yeah.
sure?" question mark and all of that stuff. It really was kind of that defining moment where it's like, this is it. And overall, the stuff we've even been hearing afterwards now, in that Tim Graham thing, I will say this. I'm going back to it, going back to the well here.
Mm-hmm.
It to me, it's not as polarizing or as eye-opening as I think some out there are making it. Josh Allen was very upset over that week one and felt like he could have done better, as
Do you want to
others
say what
did.
the Tim Graham? Because I don't know if
No,
everybody knows what
yeah.
you're talking about. Let's. Yeah.
If you are not aware, sorry,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't make the assumption that everyone understands what that one
Because this
was.
was a great nugget by Tim Graham.
It was. So Tim Graham on a podcast came out and essentially said that when he was writing the piece about something that was essentially related to the week one loss, and I'm gonna butcher this and stuff because it's been a little bit now since I listened to it, but he wrote something about the week one loss, and he had wrote about how people were coming up to Allen essentially and patting him on the shoulder, patting him on the back, doing whatever, we'll get him next time. We got next week. The typical kind of camaraderie you see after a heartbreaking loss. And if someone's taking it hard, like Allen was, things like that, it's from there. They're just essentially, supporting their leader that's down. And what he didn't write in something that he then said, for hindsight's 2020, you really wish he did because maybe it would have more validity or maybe it would painted a better picture. And I think for what it's worth, by the way, I like that he didn't because sometimes, especially with that relationship, especially with Diggs, it could have done something more damaging to the Bills at that point in time as well. So he said, that Diggs then, he doesn't know what he said for what it's worth, but Diggs had gone up to Allen and then Allen just kind of got very upset with him and said, it's fucking week one.
Mm-hmm.
And was very upset with Diggs. Whether it was related to Diggs and what I'm getting at here, or it was just a boil over point of frustration from what had happened. Overall, it's just something that is noteworthy that it got down the line and other players were doing something that's potentially the same that Diggs was. But all of a sudden, when Diggs does this, it
Mm-hmm.
is when it hits that boiling point. It's when it hits that trigger in Allen to boil over and essentially burst out like that. And Allen is emotional, competitive in a competitive way. But overall, I don't think Allen's one of those guys who truly is, known for outbursts in that sense. At least it seems like from the outside in. But overall, it was something that definitely is noteworthy, interesting afterwards, because it's just yet another little tidbit, another little breadcrumb of this relationship that is Allen and Diggs. That it's like, how good or bad were things? It brings the question in there even more so, where it's like, you saw the production early on in the season, and then all of a sudden it dipped off dramatically. There could be injuries involved. There's the back problems that Diggs had, things of that nature. But overall, maybe some other things were there that, maybe it weren't seen by even your Tim Grahams and your reporters. But overall, it just got to a point potentially, and this is where some are bringing it, that it's just he was no longer even trying to look his way, although the targets would dispute that. But overall, it's just the frustration in that relationship. He was no longer his go-to guy. He was no longer his buddy. He was just his number one receiver on the field, and that's it. And overall, it just, the frustration point was too much, where that relationship was not going to work. Again, my opinion on that whole hit piece, right, hit
Mhm.
piece, shouldn't say that,
Yeah,
but
not
on
if you
that
say it.
tidbit
Yeah, I know what you mean.
is that I just think Allen had a boil over, and it
Yeah.
just got from Diggs was the trigger that just got that. But overall, it was just another one of those things where, yeah, the Diggs Allen relationship, the Diggs Bills relationship was one that was far beyond repair. It
Mhm.
was just done. And he showed again, one more time, that the production was just no longer there to put up with the problems. And you need to try to get something back for it. And overall, as you even pointed out, veteran receivers of that age are not exactly going for things like, I couldn't stop laughing, Josh, when I would see, would you do this trade out there? And it was like, there was one that was really ridiculous. It was like, Cardinals trade the 4th overall pick for Stefon Diggs and pick 28 and so it's like, in no world are the Cardinals trading pick 4
Right.
for Stefon Diggs and whatever else you're saying. Like, it's
1
just not
year of
happening.
maybe Stefon Diggs still being good, or a whole career of Marvin Harrison Jr. Let me think about that one.
Yeah, tough. But then,
Yeah.
other first round picks, it's like, guys, this is an aging veteran receiver who can still potentially give you maybe 1, maybe 2 years, if at best. I'm going to even say 1 now, based on the Texans just essentially wiping his contract. But
Mhm.
it's just one of those things where you weren't going to get a whole heck of a lot. That's why the Bills had to sweeten the pot. You got a somewhat blue chip item. Now, what are you going to do with it? And overall, the relationship was beyond repair. And I look forward to life post Diggs, as crazy as that might sound, because yes, everything I said before, where I'm not happy with the receiver room right now. I'm very
Mhm.
intrigued, as we all are, with how the draft is going to break down, and then what else they're going to do about it potentially. But the uneasiness of that is easily balanced with, we are now in life after Diggs. We don't have to deal with the uncertainty of knowing, is Diggs happy? Is our number one guy going to be, okay with everything going on the field with Allen, with McDermott, with the offensive game plan, all of this stuff? We can get back to a world where it's kind of not get back. I shouldn't say that, because hopefully it's not like we go back to 2019, because as you had mentioned, we still weren't sure what Josh Allen was at that point, but
Right.
we are going into a world now post Diggs. And, I don't want to say the world is going to revolve around Allen, but no longer are we going to be concerned about Allen's most important target on the team. And we can just build a team and have a team that is built around Allen. And hopefully it flourishes better with a lot less drama.
Allen's the dude now, and he was the dude before, but there was a superstar in the huddle that if the first quarter went by and he didn't have a catch, we were all aware of it. And it wasn't because we were worried about his ego. It was just like, wow, Diggs doesn't have a catch yet. So I'll say this, and we are going to get to the some draft talk tonight too. We are for those that don't know, we did wide receiver last week. We're going to do the other offensive positions, not including wide receivers tonight. A lot through a Bills lens. We probably won't get as in depth just because of the need that wide receiver is for the Bills. But we're going to particularly offensive line. But I will say, like, Luka and I, to varying degrees, both kind of hear things, like whether it's we're poking around or, but we don't always like say it on the air. Cause like you even told me something this week that you heard somewhat relating to this. And I'm not at all telling you to say it on the air, but it kind of, if I hear somebody else say something on a show and I can credit them with it, like somebody notable, okay, then I will say that. And then I don't always say, oh, I heard this too. But I'm going to tell you what I've pieced together through certain things. And then you can chime in with whatever you want to. And then we can kind of put a bow on this Diggs conversation. One, Tim Graham said this. I would say I haven't heard this, but I don't think it comes as a shock. Tim Graham said on his podcast, the Bills don't consider Diggs a number one wide receiver anymore. They just don't. And I think that's important because this people are really focused on that $30 million cap hit, and it is jarring, but they're done after this year. There was some immediate confusion. Like you and I were going over the numbers, like, are they really done after this year? And at first it didn't seem like they were, but no, they're done. Like after this year, it's a $30 million hit and they're done. And people are like, wait, how can they swallow 30 million? They were just barely over the cap. Well, they already were 27 million into Diggs, but he was on the roster. So they're really only taking on 3 more, but he's also not here. So it's really a better tomorrow for a dirtier today, which Luka kind of said earlier about taking the medicine this year. I heard Eric Turner from Cover One, who his show, the night that Diggs was traded, go back and listen to it. It was Eric, Anthony, the guy from CBS, Chris Trapasso. Fantastic stuff. Eric Turner is one of those guys that you listen to him talk, he's got connections on the Bills, and he let some stories go on that show that I think were fantastic. I'm not going to share them all. I'll share one that I thought was interesting. The week before the Bengals game, Josh Allen and Diggs were having some issues connecting on a certain route, and Diggs was getting frustrated with it, and Josh was basically like, it's okay, when the game starts, we're going to be fine. Game started, they missed the route, and Diggs, basically the whole sideline altercation, the famous like my hands are out like this, is basically was like Diggs saying, well, what are your excuses now? Like it wasn't practice anymore. Now it's the game. The other thing that Eric Turner said that was very interesting was last offseason when Stefon Diggs was not going to voluntary workout. Remember, like he came to the mandatory workout, but then they sent him home the first day, but he wasn't at any of the voluntary stuff. I guess word got around that Josh Allen had told the other wide receivers, we don't need him. Now, take that any way you want. You can easily see a situation where Josh Allen is just saying, hey, 14's not here. We don't need him to get through this practice. We have guys here. We have work to do. Could have been no harm, no foul. Or it could have been the other extreme where Josh Allen's like, fuck that guy. We don't need him. You don't know. I have no idea. Zero idea. But chances are, based on the way Eric Turner told the story, probably got back to Diggs. He didn't appreciate that. So I think, Luka, this is where I'm kind of like blurring the lines of things. Like I've heard enough people say it that I think there's some question going around about Josh Allen's work ethic. I think that maybe that's not as much of a secret these days. I mean, work ethic, Josh Allen, the first 2 years of his career would spend almost the entire offseason working with Jordan Palmer. And now that he's like in a superstar life, and this doesn't have to matter, you see, like, he'll even openly admit, like, I don't really worry about lifting weights in the off season. I take, my body takes a lot of hits. Okay, I get it. Like, I play a lot of golf. Sometimes I don't even throw a ball all off season. Oh, okay, that's kind of weird. He's openly joked about how poor his diet is. Now he's going to get that under control the older he gets, but it still isn't there yet. I think it's safe to say that Stefon Diggs has concerns about Josh Allen's work ethic. Now, whether that's true or not, whether that's valid, whether it justifies any of his behavior, I think that is part of the reason why. And the larger point, Luka, is any rift between the franchise quarterback, the face of your franchise, the guy who's going to carry your team for the next 10 years, and a wide receiver who already has kind of a dicey reputation, who looks like he's aging out. The quarterback's going to win that battle 100 times out of 100. Any final thoughts on the Diggs thing? Anything I just said? Anything on that? Because I think as it went on, it was apparent this was a relationship that had to end. I think there's a very good chance that Diggs does well in Houston next year. But I think what the Bills are trying to build here, and we saw it down the stretch after Joe Brady took over, is we are not an offense that funnels targets to one player. It's very much a what works this week, who's open on this concept. I think the Bills would rather have the sum of the parts be better than just like one. I'm not saying they don't want a superstar. They certainly would love to have a superstar, but I don't think Joe Brady and I don't think Josh Allen are the type of people that are going to go into any game and think, we got to make sure so-and-so gets 10 catches today. It's going to be, what's the game plan? And you saw that where one day it was Shakir, one day it was Kincaid, one day it was Cook, but it felt like it was never Diggs down the stretch after Joe Brady took over. Anyway, Luka, I said a lot there, and we're almost 40 minutes in, haven't even talked about the draft yet.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I mean, yeah, we've heard some things, or I've heard some things, and we've heard other content out there on stories. Like you said, the few that were said the night of the draft via that one show are some of the many. I feel like I will say I'm in agreement on some aspects. I think Diggs just had problem with certain aspects of how things were handled in house. We'll just put it that way. And he saw it one way. Allen saw it another way on how to handle certain things of your career, of, the organization, how you handle the game plan, whatever it is week by week or whatever time of the year it is. And at the end of the day, as you said, and as I said earlier, and as always will be, if you go up against the franchise, you will lose. And Josh Allen is the franchise. Regardless, I mean, Josh Allen could be a total a-hole. He's still the franchise. That's just how it works. If you go up against Aaron Rodgers, depending on how you feel about him, it doesn't matter. Yeah. That is Aaron Rodgers. Same, all things apply. And I will say this, your comment, and like, I find it funny when people have their feelings on how to handle off seasons. The off season, the true off season. I'm not talking about once voluntary starts and all of these things. And I do believe that you should try to get workouts or just make time during that time to make sure you don't have too much rust, we'll call it, overall. But that aside, I don't think there's one way to skin a cat here. I don't think there's one way to do it. And overall, if Josh Allen wants to spend it playing a lot of golf, going on golf content creators, doing things, having fun, whatever it is, I'm okay with that. I think there's multitude of ways to handle things. I mean, Tom Brady showed how to basically, hey, we're going to meet in California and with all my receivers constantly, we're going to do things. And Aaron Rodgers would just kind of disappear off the face of the earth. And like, those are two Mount Rushmore like quarterbacks in Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. Like, there's no one way to do it. You would like to see a little bit more effort at times from a fan perspective, because you're like, oh, this guy cares. He's trying to improve whatever it is. But at the same time, is that truly actually going to matter? No one knows, nor does it probably matter. And at the end of the day, if that's what Diggs had a problem with, or if some of the problems he had with him, it's like, dude, who cares? Just deal with yourself. But then also to have that mentality where, as you had brought it up with the comment, where regardless of the context, if he had a problem with Allen saying we don't need 14 or we don't need him around here or whatever it is, it's like, that's your own problem again. Like, that's just you getting personally upset at something that realistically you might not even have the total understanding of what the context is, why it was said, all of these things. And does it really matter? Because I think sometimes as well in this kind of story, and this is where I even had a problem with the national media and stuff, where sorry, my little nephew Jackson had a lot of cough last weekend. So anyone, if you hear me coughing or whatever, I think I might have caught a little something.
Thanks, Jackson.
The little bugger around here was coughing up around my house. Overall, at the end of the day, what I had a problem with was the national media and stuff, and us. If we even just did it here earlier, where it's like, oh, are they no longer buddy and all this stuff? It's like, it's a professional work environment. You don't have to go into work and care about how, and this sounds crude, but you don't have to care about how your coworkers are personally. And, you don't have to get involved in their life to still have a great professional relationship. If it works and you seem to have, a click with someone and it works, then maybe you want to do things on the side and stuff with them. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And I actually have always been in this world where you do need to be able to separate personal from work. And football, yes, it's a sport. Yes, it's a game and all of these things, but this is their job. This is a professional work environment. You want them to be professionals. And if Diggs is getting personally upset at things and shots and stuff like that, I don't know if necessarily it was actually targeting him, but you got to get over it. And I think Diggs, for the most part, even early on, when maybe rifts were starting to be there, was able to do it. But for whatever reason, him internally just could not get over things as it just kept snowballing and getting more and more and more. And it just led us to the point where it is now. And the Bills have moved on. And he is most likely, as the Bills think, no longer a wide receiver one. He goes to Houston, where they really don't need him to truly be that at all anyways. They have a plethora of young, talented receivers in their own right that it's they basically turned Robert Woods into Stefon Diggs, and that's a great place for them to be. But overall, it's, the Bills, I think, at the end of the day, whereas the play on the field might not be better at this moment in time, and it probably won't be at the receiver position going into next year, they are in a better place overall as an organization and where things should hopefully go moving forward, because Diggs is no longer here and Allen and everyone else can just go on with their jobs.
I said I had one more. I said I was done with Diggs, and I have one more question. What is his What is his legacy as a Buffalo Bill? Because I feel like had this relationship ended more naturally, where maybe he goes another couple years and he just is like a normal cap casualty that you see all the time in the sport. He goes on, finishes his career elsewhere. I think he would have been a Wall of Famer. I think he would have been one of those all-time Bills. And had he wanted to, could be a guy that could come back and be a legend of the game anytime he wants to. I think all of that is out the window now. I really do. I think when it ends bad, and I think when you have a situation where it feels like it's team against player, I don't expect Jason Peters to go on the Wall of Fame. You know what I mean? I don't. Marshawn Lynch has come back and been a legend of the game to his credit, and he wanted out of here. I don't think Willis McGahee's been back. Willis McGahee said some pretty nasty things about Buffalo. Diggs has never done that.
Yeah.
Diggs did issue the apology, not the apology. That's not the right word.
Farewell.
The farewell.
The AI generated
Oh, that
farewell.
was super AI generated. And that's fine. I use AI a lot for work. I'm not mad at Diggs at all about that.
It gets
AI,
used in the school. If anyone wants to know, it gets used in your school place a lot more than you imagine. Just
yes.
letting you know, teachers literally have programs about AI and how they can utilize it.
Yeah.
So
I'm not mad at him at all about that. It's there, use it. I'm sure he read it before
he
he hit
still had
send.
to think about doing that in order to prompt and have that output. So the thought is still literally there.
Are you with me though that his Bills legacy is tarnished, if not kind of ruined?
Tarnished, sure. Ruined, no. I think time heals all, first and foremost. And he's not a Wall of Famer. Like that is that you have to be special to be a Wall of Famer. Like you have to. And not saying that the years of Diggs in Buffalo weren't special productive wise, but overall it's not just stats that get you on a Wall of Fame, right? Like longevity matters, things like that. Like I would expect to see is Aaron Schobel's not on the Wall of Fame, right? I just want to make sure I'm okay. Aaron Schobel would be on the Wall of Fame before a Stefon Diggs. Let's just put it that way.
Kyle Williams.
Kyle Williams. Yeah. Like there would be many other candidates that would come before Stefon Diggs. But I can still see a world where, let's say 5 years after he retires, he's finally Hall of Fame worthy. Like he won't make the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, at this point in time. But the 5-year mark, you all of a sudden are Hall of Fame eligible. That by that point where you really separated yourself from your playing career, and if the Bills are kind of going through the Rolodex, not to age ourselves here, but going through the Rolodex of like legends of the game, it's like, oh, Stefon Diggs is available. Let's hit him up for a nice week 3 home game against the Raiders or whatever, and see if he wants to do the legends of the game stuff. Like I can see a world where even time will separate it now, and it's like, yeah, he'll do that. If he says yes, I think they would do it, and I think the fans would welcome it and stuff like that. I don't think it's I don't think it's bad enough when it comes to a public perception to be to the point where he is no longer allowed to step foot in the 716. Like I look at it as if you're now T.O. didn't do anything wrong, not to bring up T.O. again in this podcast, but if T.O. is good enough to welcome back as a legend of the game and stuff just because of 1 year, it's like that bar is pretty damn low. It's like you just had to be memorable for the Bills. You had to be a fan favorite at some point. And at the end of the day, Josh, Stefon Diggs was a fan favorite for a few years here. So it's going to be something that in time, I don't think the negative stuff will matter. It will take for him to kind of be out of the league in order for that to happen. Bills at Houston this year is going to be, I am imagining a primetime game. I bet you ESPN would sure love that being on Monday night so that they could just talk about Allen and Diggs
Sunday
once
Night
more.
Football week 2, in my opinion.
Oh my
Week 1's
God.
always an NFC East game, like Cowboys, whoever.
Cowboys Giants. I mean, it's
Yeah.
always Cowboys
Week
Giants.
2, Houston home opener. Bills probably open at home against somebody. Get it out there. Because you want Allen and Diggs healthy for that game. You got to do it early, just in case one of them gets hurt.
That's a good point. I mean, like I said, I vote ESPN's going to be licking their chops for that. It will
Yeah.
be a national media game because the national media will want to eat up that storyline. It's a great
Mhm.
point on you saying you want them healthy, and boy, will all eyes be on a handshake or midfield dap up or not.
Mhm.
And yeah, I foresee that happening, but I don't think it's fully ruined, Josh, to circle it back and put a bow on it. I think it's tarnished for now. Time heals all. And at the end of the day, I can see in the new stadium come 20, let's say 2030, Diggs is back doing a Legends of the Game kind of, hype up
Mhm.
situation. And the roar at that point will be loud. The pop will be heavy. And at that point as well, if Josh Allen's still the quarterback for the Bills, which hopefully at that point he is, um, I bet you they would handshake and dap up and stuff like the relationship there would be good. Like you would want to remember the good times if you're Allen and Diggs, not what it all went wrong. Because I don't know, again, bringing up T.O., I don't know what the relationship is like for T.O. and McNabb, but I bet you if they ran into each other in an environment like that, they would be friendly and just talk about the good times because you can be professional in that environment and everything's, all okay. Because for the last time, Josh, time heals all.
And T.O.'s like, hey, remember that time that you threw up in the huddle in the Super Bowl when I was on a broken leg and still tried to carry out? Good times, good times. So that would be a classic T.O. thing. One last thing I want to say, though, and this is not, we do a lot of talking to each other. We talk about the players, but there's also the listeners out there. And there was a lot of pain on the timeline this week, Luca. I think maybe some younger fans, and I don't say that at all condescendingly. Like, I'm 41 years old and I've been through some things in my sports life. Nothing really shocks me. Luca's a bit younger than me, but still, he's been a fan of sports long enough that he's seen players he loves go to other teams and leave, and teams that he loves prop up players that he loves, and all of a sudden that relationship turns sour. And I think there was a lot of real pain for Bills fans this week, Luca, when basically what they saw was their guy, or if not their number one guy, for sure their number two guy of the last handful of years. A lot of jerseys, a lot of 14 jerseys out there. And quite frankly, a lot of Bills fans that every time there'd be a hint that Diggs might be losing interest in the Bills would jump up and say, "Oh, that's just Diggs being Diggs." Or, "Oh, you got to take it, can't take his social media seriously. Oh, he's just clowning around." Um, I feel bad for you all. And I don't say that anything other than genuinely. I know it stinks. I know this is sports and it's supposed to like have a certain segment of our life and it shouldn't wrap us up in our emotions like it does, but it does. And if this is your first time having your heart broken by a player that you believed like wanted to be here as badly as you wanted him to be here, and it turns out he kind of made a heel turn, to borrow a term from WrestleMania, at the very end, that stinks. It does. I saw it with Marshawn Lynch to a much lesser degree than Stefon Diggs. I saw it with Willis McGahee. That one hit me kind of hard because I was of a younger age and I really started getting on the McGahee bandwagon. Shoot, I mean, I even saw like Reuben Brown and Eric Moulds like throw their arms up in the air and say, I can't deal with it anymore. And it sucks. And it's painful. Now, that was at the end of their careers. But I empathize with all of you. It's a tough week. It's a tough week to be a sports fan, and that's a tough reality, a tough pill to swallow. Luca, have the Bills boxed themselves in a corner where they have to take a wide receiver in this draft? I looked on FanDuel, and right now, the Bills' first position or first drafted player by the Buffalo Bills, wide receiver, far and away,
Yeah.
best odds, minus 240. You get better odds doing the field than wide receiver, which I think is right. I get it. It makes sense. But for a draft that has every position you could possibly want, that feels kind of like a trap. The next closest, defensive lineman, plus 470, cornerback, plus 750, offensive lineman, Luka, plus 1,300. I might be sprinkling a little bit of cash on that one. Safety, plus 1,600. For a team that lost Hyde and Poyer this offseason, linebacker, 5,000. Don't waste your money there. Just find a linebacker. Luka, have they boxed themselves into two-part question? Have they boxed themselves into wide receiver, and do those odds surprise you as somebody who I know likes to dabble in the old gambling?
I do like to dabble in the old gambling world. Thank you, South Carolina women's team. Proud of you. Let's see here. I don't think. How do I address this? You don't draft on need. you just don't do it. I had this conversation with a family member, Josh. As much as they need a receiver, and we all want to see them draft a receiver and be aggressive in drafting said receiver, because most likely if you're being aggressive, you're coming out with the big 3 or 4, depending on who you are. Josh, myself, we have a little bit of differentiating opinions on that. But at the end of the day, the draft is not for immediate need. The draft is not for I need this guy and I will do anything I can to get this guy because we need him now. No, you draft for the future. You draft because it's best for your organization for years to come, regardless if it's a first round pick, a second round pick, a fifth round pick. You are always targeting guys that you believe are good for the organization for years to come. If immediate impact is had with this player, that is only a bonus, right? The only time that you're hoping for that is if you're drafting a franchise quarterback inside the top 5 or whatever that year is and however the draft board's breaking down. It is just one of those things where outside of quarterback, you are drafting best player available. You should be drafting best player available. And therefore, a position is never what you're locked into. Said all that, they kind of tipped their hand and were in that situation where they needed a corner a few years ago. But well, depending on how you look at it, luckily for them, they had a decent amount there that made sense around their pick. That pick doesn't seem to be working out, but thank God Brandon Beane hit a home run much later in that draft, and we're all funky dory there, and everything's okay.
Can
Right?
we just pretend Christian Benford was the first round pick? I would sleep so much better at night.
Yeah, but overall, it's one of those things where the value of tackle when it comes to betting is so good considering the draft you're sitting in. And we will get into it where, I mean, there's one where I have literally in the quote unquote destined for the Hall of Fame tier. Ooh. And it's just one of those things. The Bills would not be getting that individual for what it's worth. But if they traded up for that guy, I would have serious questions about what is going on.
We're going to sell the farm to get a tackle.
It's like, oh no, this isn't the 1930s, man.
Beam.
Like this ain't running backs and tackles. Come on. But overall, yeah, this is a draft where even though the receivers are there and everything of that, no, you are not locked into a corner on position at all. You never should be. And I will say, by the way, Josh, just fun fact, not to go on the sad note here, but the funniest part about you saying, I'm old, I've watched sports enough to have lived through something like this. I think, what went into my head is Anquan Boldin getting traded to the Ravens in 2010. I don't know why that's where my head went, but man, that day sucked because, of course, where the Cardinals were at that point and on the up and everything was great, but Boldin was pissed off that he wasn't number one because, well, unfortunately for him and fortunately for the Cardinals, they had Larry Fitzgerald on the other side. So sorry, bud, you ain't number. You're not
I would not have thought that would have been where you went. And I hesitate to even bring this up because I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about hockey, but the day that the Sabres trade away both of their best players.
They didn't trade that. That one was different. That wasn't a trade. That is July 1st came. No, well, Darcy Regier tried to do a Hail Mary. Oh, we'll give you that 5-year, $25 million contract you asked for last offseason as like an insult, essentially, to Danny Briere. Yeah, I mean, we could go down that road. I could probably discuss July 1st, 2007 for 3 hours, but
it sounds like a good Sabres chat topic when there's like the dead period, which doesn't really exist in hockey because it's a cool sport and it's like, boom, we're right at the draft.
The Anquan Boldin in football terms, the day they traded Anquan Boldin, you're like, oh crap, we're no longer the best receiving core in the league. We can't have these two beautiful number one receivers anymore. This
Yeah.
sucks.
I agree with you. I'd say about 80%. You don't draft for need, but I think what the Bills have done is they have boxed themselves to a point where the professionals in their draft room can isolate. We probably want to get a wide receiver in this draft. And that's where the aggression comes in. That's where they determine where is our cutoff on the big wide receivers. Let's say they have 4. And how aggressive are we willing to get up to get one of those big 4? And, we joked about trading up for a tackle. A tackle is a very important position. The Bills right now just don't have a screaming need for a tackle. That's why I laughed. I'm like, they're not going to sell the farm to trade up for a tackle. The screaming need for a wide receiver is what makes your wheels turn and consider trying to make a leap from like 28 to 14 if you can go get a Brian Thomas Jr. Or even trading up kind of like they did with Kyer Elam a couple years back, where it's like, oh my gosh, like there's been a huge run on receivers. And right now we only have a first round grade left on, say, Leggett. And we got to make sure we secure him. So we're going to go up and get him, even though we have defensive ends, linebackers, cornerbacks out there that have the same grade as him. So that's where, and then I'd say the other thing is like, if you miss out on that tier, you could also go the other way and say, well, at this point, like there's like 5 receivers here that are all kind of the same on our board. We could even move back 5 spots and still get one of them and get some extra capital. So I think while you're not just picking for need, you can put yourself in position where the need will end up lining up with best player available when you're on the board. I also think that need will be a tiebreaker. Like if you get on the
Yeah.
board and your 3 best players are wide receiver, defensive tackle, and guard, wide receiver is going to get the nod. Or if they all have like end of first round grade, wide receiver is going to get the nod. But I'm with you. Like you're not just going to go in there and only rank wide receivers in the first round and not pay attention to any other position. They would need to be fired like yesterday if they did that. So I'm with you. So let's talk about this draft class outside of receiver, but through this Bills lens. And I think a lot of that Bills lens right now is how do we get one of these wide receivers to fall to us? One way, Luka, for us to get wide receivers or any position you might fancy to fall to you. I've been watching some British shows, so like fancy is my new word. Is every time a quarterback goes off the board, it's like I feel like every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. Every time a quarterback goes off the board, Bills fans should stand and applaud. Unless he goes to New England and you like that quarterback, then it's a little dicey. But every time a quarterback goes, that is a player at a position that the Bills had zero interest in picking that pushes down another player down to them. Luka, everything I have been doing on quarterbacks tells me we could see as many as 6 quarterbacks come off the board by the time the Bills pick at 28. 6 seems like the absolute best case scenario. It seems like no matter what, 4 will be off the board. So here's what I got, and you tell me what you agree with. So I have Caleb Williams. It seems all but locked in number 1. Nothing's going to move him off that spot. It seems like Jaden Daniels, after an entire football season of Drake May and Caleb Williams being 1-2, it seems like Jaden Daniels is more and more of a lock to go number 2 overall to Washington. Where they go is kind of irrelevant because I think either way, Jaden Daniels will be off the board before the Bills pick. That's a good thing. JJ McCarthy, the quarterback from Michigan, seems kind of like a late riser where maybe you didn't notice him too much during the season because they ran the ball so well. But now that people are diving into the tape, maybe it seems like the NFL is higher on this kid than the draft websites, where it feels like he is somebody who could go as high as the top 10, maybe even top 5. And then the guy I already mentioned, Drake May, felt like he was somewhat of a lock to go 2 overall all college football season long, maybe even push Williams. He feels like maybe he's losing some momentum. Maybe there's some concern about him missing some layups, but man, it would be a stunner if he didn't go in the first 27 picks of this draft. So the next 2 names, Luka, it feels like that you really want to hope for, get some momentum here late and get into that top 28 would be Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. Penix, man, he has all the tools, but some real unfortunate injuries, multiple ACL injuries. He's a left-handed quarterback, which the league doesn't particularly love because you kind of have to like flip your entire offense. And then Bo Nix just seems like a decent prospect. Do you agree with me that the best case scenario is 6? Is there even somebody else that I'm missing? And what do you think is like, what would you set the over under on how many quarterbacks come off the board by the time the Bills go?
6 is aggressive. I don't think Bo Nix is coming off the board in the first round.
Okay.
I'm just going to put that one out there right now. I think Bo Nix is an interesting one where it's so funny. So Bo Nix is a rare quarterback where it's like there's a pre-COVID Bo Nix and there's a post-COVID Bo Nix. That I can't believe I'm starting off a quarterback section with Bo Nix, but pre-COVID Bo Nix had hype at Auburn, and it was like, oh, this guy can be the next thing, blah blah blah. It wasn't really working out at Auburn. He had a good year that first year, but then it kind of went down a little bit. He transfers to Oregon. He obviously does what he does. He's a 5-year guy in college. He's 24 years old. I bring those things up because it's one of those things where there's already it's not a running back tread on the tire situation, but it's like you got a lot of tape on this guy. He obviously has developed very well in college, but he's at 24. How many years are you getting out of him? All of this stuff. What are you going to have to do to get him ready? Oregon is not exactly what we call a seamless transition to the NFL in the quarterback world. They do things and operate in a way that is not conducive to the pro game, we'll call it. So it's one of those situations where I just don't look at Bo Nix, even though he kind of has a lot of things that teams will obviously like. He's not a first round guy. That is my opinion. Some people have him there in the late first. Then we're talking before Bills, and I just don't see it 27 or earlier. So you're gonna say something?
So the hope for Bo Nix then on your evaluation, somebody has a high second round grade on him, but they want to get up into the first round to get the 5th-year option, and
Right.
they want to get ahead of the teams that are resetting their board, and that's where the 28 spot becomes kind of a sweet spot. So not a traditional first round pick, but absolutely somebody you could see like teams panic and want to make sure they get a quarterback, and maybe that's what you have to hope for.
The 5th round option is a great point to bring up because it's one of those things where in the modern NFL, 5th round option is everything on a quarterback, buys you another year, unless they become a superstar, which every team of course hopes for. You're not paying them after 2-3 years, and you can at least control their wage a little bit longer as you figure out what you're trying to do. So yes, if the Bills find themselves in a situation where they're not aggressively trying to trade up, they could actually be a sweet spot to get one of those reshuffle situations, trade back out of the first round if they're trying to acquire more things, maybe get a receiver they don't want to use that first round on, and they feel more comfortable in, let's say, the first 10 of the second round, so on and so forth. All of these kind of things. That's where the Bo Nix would come in the first round. But since we're in the scenario of coming off 27 or sooner, Bo Nix is not that to me. Caleb Williams is just as home run can get. He's not Andrew Luck home run, but you're overthinking it if you're not going that. I think the fascination with Jaden Daniels, personal vendettas aside, I have against him. It's you're really trying to talk yourself into it if you're going Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams. I think the NFL has honestly put a muzzle on Chicago. Caleb Williams would have been announced as the first overall pick a month ago if the NFL didn't do that. Where it gets really interesting to me, Josh, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but if you took injuries away, if you could turn off injuries like you can in Madden, Michael Penix would probably be going much higher because the problem with Penix truly is just he is an injury, maybe 2 away from career over, it feels like. And it's very, very hard for a GM who maybe is either holding on to their job and needs to draft a franchise quarterback that they can latch onto, and or they're trying to get, they just got the job and they're trying to latch onto. Michael Penix is not kind of that guy that you want to be like, all right, this is I'm riding this horse. Like, this is where we're going to ride this guy into the sunset. It's going to be beautiful, everything, because there's so much risk involved there. I love Penix as a prospect. I love him so much. There was a world, as we were talking through the season, I know off air, you would ask me, you're like, hey, talking about Cardinals, like, what are you feeling? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I would love to see them. This is a world where I wanted them to get rid of Kyler still. And I still, we're not getting into that. But I was like, you still take Marvin Harrison Jr. and then see if you can secure Michael Penix early second round. Now he played so well that he's going to be a first round guy. I think eventually a team, especially in the teens, Josh, I think the Raiders, the Broncos, the Saints, those teams right there in the teens, I can see as destinations for Penix. I can see one of those guys just going, look, we need a especially with their cap situations. I don't think the Raiders are in dire straits, but definitely the Broncos and Saints are. And they just need a quarterback that they can potentially utilize for years to come, that they can kind of keep under wage and keep managed for that. That's where I find him kind of pegged as interesting. I could see him falling back late into the early 20s, but he will come off the board, in my opinion, before the Bills pick. Jaden Daniels, Drake May. Just want to say this real quick before we move on. If you are drafting Jaden Daniels before Drake May, in my opinion, you are falling into the same trap as a lot of teams did when they evaluated a Sam Darnold. Not that Sam Darnold and Jaden Daniels are the same. Jaden Daniels is way better than Sam Darnold. But Drake May, the reason people are falling out of love of him is the wrong reasons. Like, he still has everything you want, and he has proved it when he had better talent, like a Josh Downs and everything in front of him. He dropped off a little bit. He was missing layups, things like that. You're going to fall into that same trap that had Josh Allen fall to number 7. And you can't be doing that if you have a guy who truly does have a ceiling like Drake May does. And I find it foolish if you take a Jaden Daniels over a Drake May, because in the pro game, I just don't think Jaden Daniels is someone that can truly get to a point that elevates a team to a level that a Drake May can. And you should obviously trust yourself as an organization to be able to develop whoever it is into the best player that they can be. And Drake May is just a higher ceiling player than Jaden Daniels at the end of the day. All things that Jaden Daniels can do on the ground aside, like legitimately. I understand all of that. I understand what he can do. I saw it firsthand. His freshman year at ASU, I swear to God, I made a bet with someone that he's going to win a Heisman before he hit the NFL. Unfortunately for me, and fortunately for me at the same time, he won a Heisman. He just didn't do it with Arizona State. It breaks my heart every time I think about it. But overall, Drake May is the better prospect in the NFL. And I just find it foolish that people are trying to talk themselves into Jaden Daniels not only being better than Drake May, but then even it's like, hey, you could see a world where he goes first overall. It's just people are infatuated with Caleb Williams. It's like, no, dude. Like, Jaden Daniels is great. I just don't see it compared to those other two.
So when it comes to Jaden Daniels, one thing I'll say about Drake May, I was stunned that Chris Sims didn't love him, because that's like the prototypical quarterback. Because Chris Sims loved Josh Allen. Chris Sims loved Patrick Mahomes. He loves toolsy quarterbacks.
Justin Herbert.
He can kind of like see through the whole, like, I didn't produce in college, but I have all these tools. This is why kind of deal. I'm not saying that's what happened to Drake May, but then like Jaden Daniels had, two of the best receivers in the country running routes for him. All the things that you think would dock him, and Chris Sims likes Jaden Daniels more. I thought that was interesting. Quickly on Jaden Daniels, how good of a runner do you think he can be at the pro level? Because he obviously has the speed. To my eyes, I didn't see him like utilize the running game like as much as I thought he would when I went back and looked at it. But do you think it's something where the teams are just falling in love with his two-way ability as the quarterback goes? Because I think Drake May has some of that ability too, like low-key Josh Allen, where it's like he can do this in the NFL too. And I don't know if that's what they're holding against Jaden Daniels. What's your read on that?
I think yes.
Or holding against Drake May. I asked that funky.
Yeah. The tape, I think, is deceiving people too much on Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels is a great runner. Honestly, he was great at finding space and, slipping through the cracks of whatever it is in the pocket to get out of the pocket, and then finding the space to essentially use. He's got pretty long legs. I'll be quite frank. When you watch him, he's got long legs, and he can pick up. It's like a gazelle where it picks up speed over time. He would create big plays, not because he has that quick burst. He is, you know what he is? He's the antithesis of a Kyler Murray. He is the complete opposite of a Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is as shifty and as burst quick as they come, like even way more than Lamar. Lamar is faster in, let's say, 100-yard sprint, but Kyler Murray in the first 10 is probably dusting a Lamar and is definitely dusting a Jaden Daniels, as is Lamar, for what it's worth. But overall, Jaden is just slippery with his movement. And then when he gets in the open field, he's got this stride to him that he can pick up speed. And he's got a slow second gear to him. And I'm not saying slow in a negative, like it just takes a little bit more than your average athlete to get to the second gear. But when he does get to it, it is as fast as some people out there. It's just overall, I think on tape, when you watch it, you're fascinated with it. The dual threat quarterback, of course, is kind of like a big thing out there. And you can do so much with that in the modern day NFL. But I just don't get why Drake May is being overlooked at as an athlete as well. It is there as it in himself. And like you're saying here, it's Drake May just has, I say it a lot, and it's truly how I look at stuff. At the end of the day, if I'm looking at high end guys, I want the higher ceiling. I want the better potential. And the better potential is unquestionably Drake May. And that is saying, by the way, I think Jaden Daniels in this draft has the best deep ball. I want to say that right now. I think Jaden Daniels has the best touch to deep ball. And I'm not saying he's got the strongest arm. It's just I've seen enough in my fandom, in the tape, and then in the I wanted to hate him so much at LSU, but watched it because I hated him at LSU. And every time the one thing he had that was damn good was that fucking deep ball, Josh. It was just so good. He put it in a basket. He made Brandon Ayuk before he was Brandon Ayuk. I just want to put that out there. It was like, oh shit, this guy can
It's a
put
lot of
it.
Brandon Ayuk's in one sentence.
Yeah, but like Jaden Daniels knew how to put it in his basket every throw, and it was incredible. So then fast forward, you give him two kind of first round grade wide receivers. Although actually he had that. Jaden Daniels had a very fortunate college career, Josh. He had N'Keal Harry and Brandon Ayuk at one point, and then he got Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. Life must be good. Not to get on the N'Keal Harry thing, because obviously we know how N'Keal Harry worked out, unfortunately. But overall, it's like one of those things where he's had fortunate things and he has a beautiful deep ball and all of these things. But Drake May is just a higher ceiling. He's the better quarterback in this case. And you should be able to trust your abilities to do whatever it is that can be worked on, like making the layups easier. I mean, these are things we said about, and I'm not saying Drake May is Josh Allen, but these are the things you would say about a Josh Allen prospect. And it's like it's all out there. This is how you correct it. This is how it gets fixed. If that's truly what you think the problem is with him, it's not a complicated process, and try it with that. Because if it then works out, holy shit, do you have something special in front of you?
So quarterback is not going to be on the Bills' radar probably at all. I mean, they have Mitchell Trubisky to be their backup quarterback. I don't see them carrying three, so I don't even see Brandon Beane taking a flyer on a day three quarterback, quite honestly, because his approach to day three is he wants to take guys that have a chance to make the 53, and I think it'd be an uphill battle. One position I think could be on the Bills' radar on draft day, maybe not in the first round, hopefully not in the first round, running back. Because when you look at the depth chart right now, it's James Cook coming off of a Pro Bowl season, 2 years left on his rookie deal. They are in fantastic shape there. They brought back Ty Johnson, and they have Darrington Evans on a futures deal. But Luka, I do think that the Bills will come out of this draft that they have 10 picks in with a running back. I'm right now in my mind, the way that looks is that's probably something they try to accomplish on day three. I could even see them taking a couple running backs, depending on how the board looks. You know, by the time you get to day three, you're just kind of taking players you like, and the board is a wild card at that point. But I looked at Daniel Jeremiah's top 50 that he posted over the weekend, because I think that's a good gauge for how this draft really sets up, like, talent wise. Because Daniel Jeremiah, I think, does as good of a job as anybody in the industry of not only using his own opinions on players' talent, but also utilizing his sources around the league to build his board on what he's hearing on how high these guys can go. We just talked about quarterback. 6 of his top 50 players in this draft were quarterback. For reference, 12 of his top 50 were wide receivers. 12 of his top 50 were wide receivers. Like basically 24% were wide receivers.
Yep.
How many running backs do you think were on that list?
If it was my top 50, I had one that just slipped in there recently, but I'm going to guess 0.
0. Not one running back. And that could be as simple as running backs have been devalued by the league. That's true. But I think when you start to look under the hood at this draft class, Luka, there is not, you know, There's not a Bijan Robinson or a Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that's pretty clear. But you were even saying to me off the air, there's not even like a Breece Hall or a Kenneth Walker in this class. Do you agree with me that the Bills probably have the appetite to address running back in this class? And if they do, are there any names that are intriguing to you?
I do. Based on what we saw late season, yes. I think they're going to want to get another guy in there. I think when you saw them kind of bounce between Latavius Murray and Leonard Fournette, and they had obviously Damian Harris that they brought in the offseason, that didn't work out. Then you saw Ty Johnson get notable carries. Notable is, obviously like 4 or 5, 6, depending on game script. But um, it's not like Darrington Evans is moving the needle at all. He's on a future contract. If he can thrive, good for him. But overall, there's something there. And I think the draft this year for the Bills, when it comes to running backs, is going to scratch that itch potentially. It's gonna, in my opinion, probably have to be involving it, kind of like a James Cook situation where they're trading back to acquire maybe a pick here and there. And they just keep moving back until it makes more sense for them value wise. But at the end of the day, like if they don't move, let's say their 4th round pick, or let's say, they did get late 3rd, somehow a move was happened and stuff, your Audric Estime. I that's the one I always circle, honestly. I would just love to see it so much at a
How high you think
personal
he could
level.
go?
Probably early 3rd, mid 3rd.
He's
I
like
think
AJ Dillon kind of territory.
um I would say slightly more dynamic, not as thick thighs. How
Okay.
about that? No one has AJ Dillon thighs,
Yeah.
though, for what it's worth. But yeah, he is a pounder. He honestly, I think another thing with Audric Estime, he can be used in a lot of different ways. Like, I think that would throw teams off when he was with Notre Dame, of course. Like, you see him and you see how he runs downfield, especially, and you're like, oh, we got to, load the box, gap assignments, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden he slips out and it's like, boom, like he's hitting you there. All of a sudden they just hit him on a swing pass. Boom. He's gone again. Like, get him in space and he can do things. Like, he's one of those unique guys where it feels like he fits a certain mold, but then also he'll show you things here or there that you just have to keep accounted for him more than not. And I think he would also be that great compliment, be something like what Devin Singletary was doing, things like that, where it just provides a reliable back in the backfield that isn't James Cook now, for this team. So overall, that would make a lot of sense. I don't see it where they would go, in the 2nd round for a Blake Corum, for Jonathan Brooks, especially, who I regard as the best running back in the draft. I think that's pretty widely regarded, honestly. I mean, I think some people out there are liking Trey Benson a lot out of Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
There's Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. But when they look at all of these running backs, just to wrap it up here, they're all day 2 guys. I mean, the way I tiered them is Jonathan Brooks is my best running back. And I said, someone has to be the best tier. That is Jonathan Brooks. And then the next tier is, here's some more day 2 tier. Like that's how I look at it. It's like, okay, these are other guys in the 2nd and 3rd round. I'd be like, yeah, no, I wouldn't mind these guys. And then my last tier is, so here's some future Bills potentially tier. And Audric Estime and Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin. Those are the 2 guys I look at and I go, I can see them fitting a mold that the Bills like. Although I want to say Braylon Allen is not your typical, he's not your typical pounder. To me, he's like a younger Latavius Murray, where he still has some burst to him. He's bigger in frame, so he can still run physically, but he can get up and go as well. Just an interesting guy to pay attention to. I don't see them going with like a Will Shipley, though, or anything like that. Or I don't see them taking a Trey Benson or a Jalen Wright. Guys like that, where it feels like you're just drafting a repetitive running back at that point. You're drafting just a rotational James Cook to bring in when James Cook needs a rest. It feels like when they brought in Ty Johnson, and not that Ty Johnson's a big bruiser, but overall, they were looking for something a little bit different out of their running back when Ty Johnson was coming in, or they were using him in a different way. And obviously Leonard Fournette really is, of course, something different. And Latavius Murray at this point in his career is something different. That it's like, I feel like they're probably going to try to get something youthful to also fill that role moving forward that's controlled salary wise.
It's funny. I hope I'm not dropping frames, and let me know if you can't hear me. Braden Allen is somebody that jumped out to me, and I think teams are going to devalue him on draft day because of his deficiencies in the passing game. He's not a great receiver. He's not a great run blocker or a great pass blocker. But for the Bills, like, you have your dude in James Cook. Like, he's your receiver. And if I don't think they're going to trust any rookie coming in and be their primary pass blocker as it is. I think that'll either be James Cook in year 2 or Ty Johnson or veteran running back signed in June, that we haven't even had on our radar yet. But what I like about him is he is, like you said, he's huge, he's fast, and he's a 2-down running back. But in this offense, I don't need you to be anything more than that. Take some tread off of Josh Allen's tires down by the goal line. Be a diverse weapon for this offense that we hand the ball off to in 2 tight end packages. An absolute pain in the ass if you think about turning around, handing the ball off in 4-minute situations where you're trying to run out the clock. I think Latavius Murray is a perfect comp because that you can kind of see that's what the Bills wanted last year, was like a banger to James Cook's, slasher, to really oversimplify it. And that's the kind of player, kind of like a Roshan Johnson last year, that I think would be a very good complementary back to James Cook. But overall, not a very enticing draft class when it comes to running backs. The Bills will get one, probably get another one undrafted free agency. And, somebody will make this team because they only have 2 running backs on their roster right now outside of Darrington Evans, who's on a futures deal. But I don't expect the Bills to be overly aggressive to do that. Speaking of positions that the Bills, I don't think will be overly aggressive to pursue, tight end. Only one tight end made Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. Luka, I bet you can guess which tight end that was.
Who is Brock Bowers for 200, Alex?
Ding, ding, ding. Tell him what he's won. Brock Bowers is a freak. I think that the Bills, going back to what I said, when you look at what Brandon Beane tries to accomplish on day 3 of the draft, he wants players that have a shot to make their roster. Dalton Kincaid is the guy. He's the first round pick. Dawson Knox is the second tight end, and the Bills restructured his deal, but he is going to make this roster. And right now, without Diggs on the roster, he might be a pretty important part of that passing game until the Bills can actually get some wide receivers. And we know the Bills really like Quentin Morris. They gave him another contract extension, and he is a very useful jack of all trades third tight end that plays special teams, can play fullback, can do a little running back if he has to. He is the perfect third tight end. And I don't think that I think Will Clapp is going to take over the David Edwards role of the large tight end that comes in run heavy situations. There's just not a spot on this roster for a tight end. I don't think that the Bills are going to burn a day 3 pick on a tight end unless they just run out of ideas, or it's like the 7th round and the tight end that's sitting there on their board has a 5th round grade and everybody else is like an undrafted grade. With that said, Luka, I didn't do a ton of work on these tight ends. I mean, I watched Brock Bowers because I like having a good time, and watching him play football is a riot. Holy cow. I am curious to see where he slots in the first round. Is it possible that a team in need of a pass catcher could slot him above? I don't think they could slot him above the big 3 receivers, but could he come off the board before Thomas? I think so,
Oh, yeah.
depending on the team need. I think if you
Mhm.
want to just call it like offensive pass catching weapons, I don't think he goes before the big 3. I could be wrong. I mean, he's dynamic, but I think there's a real shot he goes before Thomas. How special is Brock Bowers in your mind?
Special. I Brock Bowers is honestly, I expect the impact of Dalton Kincaid, what he had already provided his rookie year, and some out of Brock Bowers wherever he goes, as long as it's a competent team. Let me just stipulate that. If he goes to Carolina somehow, there's not much I can anticipate out of that
Yeah.
one. But overall, Brock Bowers is a special football player. I can absolutely see him going before Brian Thomas. I think that will happen. The interesting conversation is definitely would he come off before Dunze?
Right.
Here's the thing on Brock Bowers. I think there are teams. There's probably a couple teams, and this is what I call maybe what Bean even had when he loved Dalton Kincaid as much as he did. It's the Travis Kelce effect. You look at what a tight end can do, a Hall of Fame tight end, pass catching tight end can do if they can be on the same page with your future Hall of Fame franchise quarterback, and it's powerful. It can legitimately drive an offense to the point where you don't need a Tyreek Hill or any notable receiver, and you could just keep taking shots at receiver in the draft, and hopefully you get a Rashee Rice and blah, 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 so on and so forth. What I find interesting is there's going to be a team out there that wants that. And I think if you're drafting a Brock Bowers as high as he's most likely going to go, to me, it's kind of a situation where it's a team that is in a win now situation where you're going for the luxury player. Where I kind of pull off of that is at the end of the day, there's just too many other franchise guys in this draft that I personally would not take him before Dunze. And then I see him falling also in kind of that similar 12, 13, 14 area with the Broncos, with the Raiders, with the Saints. And man, Saints, wouldn't that be hilarious? Just because, they have Taysom Hill and Brock Bowers and all, like, I don't know what you do on offense there, but have fun with it. But overall, it's like the Broncos at 12. Broncos at 12 would make sense in where it's like, okay, the big three are off. The tackles, all the franchise tackles are off. Your quarterbacks are drained. All of these things. It's just like, well, this is clearly the next best option. Like, it's not even close now. You have Brock Bowers and everyone else, and you're just taking BPA and you're going to have fun with it with whoever you have under center, because Brock Bowers is truly an inside the numbers kind of talent that will, I can't wait to see what he can do in the NFL, because when he, what he did at Georgia was really, really special. That at the tight end position, I think he could definitely be like, he feels destined to be in the conversation of, I'm not going to be outlandish and say, oh, we'll have another Gronk or Kelsey like impact guy. That's crazy. It's, generational Hall of Fame tight end situation. But overall, it's like he will be part of the next gen of elite tight ends in the league because he is that good.
Yeah. And I do think there's a chance, because like for the longest time, the stigma with tight ends was you have to wait to get the benefit of them. Like they come into the league and they're slow to hit the ground running. But when you saw what Kincaid did last year, and then even to a larger extent, Sam Laporta, who was considered a raw tight end, just came in and was just a dynamic weapon from the Lions right out of the gate. I think it will be interesting to see if there's a chance he could even sneak his way up above the big three, which would be fantastic for the Bills if that were the case. If Brock Bowers could find his way in that conversation. Sounds like we're sharing a brain, though. Like, not anybody that the Bills should be overly aggressive about looking at for 28 for sure. And the position, just as far as the roster goes. Now, look, Luka, is there any world where the Bills look at Brock Bowers? Okay, stay with me here.
Oh,
let's get nuts. Let's get nuts. Say Brock Bowers has fallen to like 20. We've seen weird things happen in the draft. Brock Bowers is there at 20, and let's say the big four wide receivers are off the board. Is there any world where the Bills go back to that 12 personnel well, and they're just like, you know what? Let's just throw Bowers and Kincaid out there, or is that ship sailed? And it's like, no, we need weapons. This is not our fight. This is not our. If he falls to 28, we'll have the conversation, but we're not gonna get weird here.
Well, okay, yeah. If he falls to 28, I mean, you're either taking Jared Verse or Brock Bowers. Well, you better be taking Brock Bowers at that point. But,
Yeah.
no, you're not aggressively doing anything for Brock Bowers. You're not even trading up 2 picks like they did for Kincaid to draft a Brock Bowers. You would have to truly be accepting that. And I honestly would think, of course, that if it was Brock Bowers, I mean, no, Bean wouldn't do this. Like, this is an outlandish thing to say, but I'm just going to say it for the sake of saying it. If it's Brock Bowers or trade back because you just can't justify drafting, let's say, an AD Mitchell as wide receiver in the first round, you would draft back. It's like, no, if Brock Bowers is sitting there, in all reality, it's
figure
like,
it out. Yeah.
You just figure it out. Like, Dawson, I know we're paying you a lot of money. We're going to be paying you a lot of money to do a lot of little things because We have Kincaid and now Brock Bowers. They're probably lining up out in our boundary because we sure don't have a receiver to do that job. So
Mhm.
they're going to fill that role. No,
Dawson, you're
you
about to
don't.
be the highest paid long snapper in the league.
Yeah. What happened to Reed Ferguson? No.
It's true.
Yeah. Brock Bowers, as awesome as he is, as much as I just pumped his tires and everything of that nature, no, the Bills are not doing anything that would be having them be aggressive in any manner to go get him.
So, long story short, we've been talking about quarterback, we've been talking about running back, we've been talking about tight end. Any one of those positions that comes off the board before the Bills pick is a fantastic situation for the Bills. We anticipate that 4 quarterbacks are absolutely locks to go before the Bills pick, probably 5. And we think Brock Bowers is a lock to go before the Bills pick. That's 6 picks. We would love to see more of those positions. Everyone else that comes off is fantastic. If a team wants to take a running back ahead of that, that's fine. But the Bills do not have a pressing need at any of those positions. The last offensive position, Luka, and I'm going to group it all into one because we're already 90 minutes into this. Offensive line. I've mentioned Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. He has 11 offensive linemen in his top 50. If you're keeping score at home, 11 offensive linemen, 12 wide receivers. 23 of his top 50 in this entire draft are either offensive linemen or wide receivers. You want to know where the talent is in this draft? Look no further, especially on the offensive side, to those 2 positions. When you look at the Bills, they just locked in Deion Dawkins to a long-term extension. They have their left tackle of the future. He's playing his best ball, coming off of a Pro Bowl season. Spencer Brown is coming off of his best season of his career, is going into a contract here. I think there's a world where the Bills could look at this if the draft falls a certain way, because I think there is a very good chance that when the Bills are on the clock at 28, the best player on their board is a tackle. The Bills could evaluate this and say, do we want to take a tackle who maybe even comes out of the box as good as Spencer Brown is, but by the time 2025 hits, Spencer Brown could be in year 1 of his second contract, which for any starting tackle is going to be eye-popping, or Bills draft pick tackle X could be going into year 2 of a rookie deal. And all of a sudden, the right side of your offensive line is Osiris Torrance and rookie offensive tackle X. And they're both cheap for the long haul. I think that's a real conversation. I know the Bills love Spencer Brown, but everything has a value proposition. Tremaine Edmonds had a value proposition. They were really high on him, but they decided to let him go. Gabe Davis, they were really high on him. They decided to let him go. I think a similar conversation is coming up for Spencer Brown. If he puts another season on tape like he had last year, I think they'll extend him. But at this point, I would not be stunned, especially with the guys in this draft, if things fall a certain way and the Bills go into that tackle well. The other aspect is they did lose Mitch Morse. Connor McGovern's the next guy up at center. They seem very confident that he's going to be the guy there. That puts David Edwards in at starting left guard, Osiris Torrance in at starting right guard. Feel really good about what you saw from Torrance. Edwards, you loved him as a depth guy, probably a starting caliber guard, but I would not be stunned if the Bills, they go guard fairly early in this draft just to push him. And also you saw some of the contracts these guards were getting. Robert Hunt with Carolina. I mean, Carolina maybe
What
needs to have
the
a
hell?
conversation all by themselves. Like, what are you doing, Carolina? Um, but like you start seeing those and you're like, okay, we're going to just start drafting guards and not paying guards. But Luka, this, before we get into the who in this class, the Bills' need for an offensive line on the surface, I don't think is too stark. I think they're comfortable with who their starting 5 would be if the season started tomorrow. And I do think they're content with guys like Ryan Vandemark, Alec Anderson, Will Clapp. They just signed Lyle Collins. So I think when you look at the depth of this group, I think they think they're in pretty good shape. I think there's at least a sneaky need where, Brandon Beane loves his linemen, where they look at this and to me, it's the Spencer Brown conversation. I just can't see them going a guard early in the draft. I just can't, unless it's just somebody that they look at and they're just like, this guy is not just a guard, but he's a center of the future. But for me, it would have to almost be we're not fully bought in on Spencer Brown, like paying him the big money next year. Where do you see the Bills' offensive line need? Is it a true need, or is it kind of off your radar in round one?
It, man, that last little, is it off the radar? It's not off the radar, not because of where the roster is. It's not off the radar because, I mean, there are 5 offensive tackles that I will happily take in the first round. And I say happily. I don't care what team you are a fan of. I would happily take this tackle because I feel very good about them for years to come. As I mentioned very early into the episode, there's a one that is just destined for the Hall of Fame in my eyes, and probably in a lot of other eyes. And by probably, I mean I'm pretty sure I've heard it from numerous others, and it just makes so much sense. And just watching him so much, Joe Alt is just it feels just destined. Like he fits, checks every box, does everything great. Like this is your prototypical Joe Thomas like guy where it's gonna work. From there, you have other guys that just feel like they could be your franchise tackle kind of guy. Your Olu, I'm not going to pronunciate all of it, but Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. Your Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State. And JC Latham, I personally have him in there as well out of Alabama. I think those 3 guys are all very high ceiling. You know, I'm not putting him with Joe Alt because Joe Alt is just one of his own, it feels like, in my eyes. But those other 3 guys are also individuals that it just feels like they have the potential to be a franchise guy. And then I have this last tier, the 5th guy, Amarius Mims out of Georgia. The tier I named, and he is by himself in this one. The tier I named him in is higher pick any other year tier. It feels like Mims was a tackle that it's like, if he wasn't in a draft where you had Joe Alt, Olu Fashanu, Talise Fuaga, and JC Latham, he would be regarded in the top 15, and Armarius Mims would be there. Unfortunately, he just is going into the draft at the wrong time. But those 5 guys, and we're not in the Joe Alt, we're not in the Olu Fashanu, we're not in the Talise Fuaga sweepstakes. I can tell you those 3 are going to be going well before the Bills would even be coming close to picking. Those 3 guys are going to be gone. But if JC Latham falls, don't anticipate it, but if JC Latham falls, if Amarius Mims is sitting there at 28 and the Bills were not able to make whatever possible happen to get someone else, and they had to just accept for what it is, which, by the way, is a whole nother conversation that we can have about the Bills drafting at 28, because I will tell you the percentage chance I believe they will be picking at 28 at some point. But if they're at 28 and Amarius Mims is sitting there, I would have zero problem, depending on the board, of course, taking him, because as you're even putting it, this is kind of a Spencer Brown conversation where it's like, if you bring this individual in and now you're bringing in true comp for Spencer Brown, you have the ability to control that wage for a lot longer period at a much lower rate than what you will probably have to extend Spencer Brown for. And if Spencer Brown is just not worth it at that higher of a level than this Amarius Mims, we'll call it for this example, you're just going to let Spencer Brown go and let him slide into that right and be happy with it. There is nothing wrong with that, and everything would be fine. So it's, yeah, interior offensive line, just really, really quick. There's not an interior offensive lineman in this draft that I would draft in the top 60. I mean, they're not there. 60 might be tough, 50 for sure. It's Zach Frazier, I like as a center out of West Virginia. Jackson Powers Johnson, I think, is the best center in the draft, best interior offensive lineman in the draft out of Oregon. But those guys they're good. They'll be rotational pieces early on as they kind of just get up to speed. Maybe they shock someone depending on the roster they're on. If the Bills ended up with Zach Frazier come day 2, however that happened, I wouldn't be upset about it, because it would make me honestly feel better about the center position, because at least you have someone that's natural to the position and as well has good tape out there with West Virginia. And probably if this McGovern situation at center does not work out, you just figure it out. You put McGovern back at guard, you bring this guy in, see if it works. There's nothing wrong with that. Feels crazy that we messed with the offensive line as much as we did already in one off
Yeah.
season. But overall, back to the tackle conversation and back to even spending a first round pick on someone, I would have zero issues with it because realistically, in my eyes, I do think those 5 guys I've named in the first round on my tackle board, those are all going before pick 28. I really believe even Amarius Mims will be going before pick 28. And now you're looking at, your Tyler Guyton, your Troy Fautanu out of Washington, Oklahoma, previously with Guyton. And those guys are also someone that could potentially peak into the first round. I don't know if they're before 28. Maybe they are. But overall, there are just so many good tackles, Josh, that it's wild that I genuinely don't remember the last time I saw a draft with this many tackles where it's like, oh, this guy's good. Oh, this guy's good. Oh, this guy's also 6'6" and 330
Right.
pounds. Oh, this guy's also 6'4", 315, 320 pounds. It's like, if it feels like the past few years we've had like, oh, is the college game changing too much where we don't have offensive linemen, or is offensive line kind of becoming this thing that is not really taught and it's harder to find and all this stuff? And all of a sudden I see this draft and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of beef in this draft.
Yeah.
This could be the self-correction to the offensive line problem in the NFL, where it feels like there's not enough out there. This is going to be the flood that comes into the league. And it's like, oh, is we like to highlight, let's say, the wide receiver drafts of years past, your Odell Beckham year and so on and so forth. This could be one that it's not the prettiest, but this will be the flood of offensive linemen that come into the league and just kind of reshape what it is to be an offensive lineman. And what a good time it is, as you mentioned, because all of a sudden interior offensive linemen and tackles are really starting to get premium dollar. And honestly, that's great because now there's going to be more. I'm not saying this in a crude way for anyone that might have a problem with this, but there's going to be more fatties out there with a lot of opportunity to make some serious cash, because boy, how fun would it be to be an offensive lineman making that amount of money and just pushing people around.
It would be a lot of fun. Fashanu is interesting. He's your number 2. I think he's closer to Joe Alt than you probably do. It sounds like you have Joe Alt, like you're already like fitting him for a
I
Hall of Fame jacket.
Yeah. Okay. Let me preface this. Joe Alt, I put a tier above.
Yeah.
Fushanu is still top 10 pick. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not
he's
I'm not being like, oh, he's not, he can't even sniff Alt's jock, man. No, he's still
so
like,
my
yeah.
thing about Fashanu is the way the NFL is in 2023, it's such a pass happy league. I think he comes into the NFL and he might already be like a top 20, like factoring in both sides, left and right, pass blocking tackle in the league before he takes a snap in the league. His pass blocking is out of this world good. Great technique, and his athleticism matches it. The concern with him is the running game. Like, he's not a good run blocker. Right now, he just kind of gets in the way. I think you could probably survive more if you're more like a wide zone team. But you think about that, and it's like, well, shoot, if you're going to have one of those not be as good as the other, you'd much rather have your quarterback be safe and just have your running back figure it out. Now, look, that's why Alt is different, because Alt can do both at a very high level, and he's 6'9", and he's 21 years old, which is also mind boggling.
It's
Like, he's
insane.
good. Joe Alt is going to be 25 when he hits his first contract if they don't pick up his 5th-year option. That is, good for him, good for the entire Alt family and his future grandkids. They're going to be rich before they're even born. What do you do with Graham Barton? Because I know a lot of people look
Mm.
at him and they're like, he's got shorter arms. He played a lot of tackle in college, but I think a lot of people are projecting him to center, even though he played such a small percentage of his career at center. I don't think the NFL will view him as a tackle. I just don't. I know we had the situation last year with Peter Skoronski and the short arms. It didn't seem to hurt him too much on draft day. I think this is a guy that I think projects to center. And if you want to talk about the Bills specifically, he kind of has the same career path as Mitch Morse, who was tackle in college, converted to center in the NFL. I don't know that this is somebody I would expect the Bills to take at 28. It seems like he might be rated highly enough by enough teams that he may not even be on the board at 28, depending on what you think of him. But what do you do with him? Would you try him at tackle? Is he more of an interior guy, or does his versatility just give him more value? What do you do with him?
So I love this conversation. And I'm not going to say the name of who I want to say this comment for, but there's someone that I had a conversation with recently where I was like, Yeah, I'm not as high on this other individual, and I'm not going to say. Well, actually, eventually, I'm going to have to say the other player's name. But um, I found it interesting that they were saying that they might even like this other guy higher than Alt because, and there's other people out there that have this. And this is where I think you can kind of get muddied waters out there on who to trust, who not to trust, and where to create your opinions from and stuff. And that's why I try to I take that stuff in, but I really, really lightly, and then I just try to create my own opinions. So you bring up the reach of Barton, right? We're talking about Barton.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I have him rated as my 8th offensive lineman in this
Mm-hmm.
upcoming draft.
Which
He's
is
not
good
a
for this class.
Yeah, it's good for this class. He's not a first round pick, but it's not because like
Mm-hmm.
oh, he's dust. It's like, no, there's just so many damn good offensive linemen.
Mm-hmm.
His arms are measured at 32 and 7/8 inches, Josh. That is very low, 18th
Mm-hmm.
percentile. Let's put it that way. There's a guy who's projected pretty damn high in this draft whose arms are 33 and 1/8, not even the 25th, 24th percentile. Still very short. But somehow, Talise Fuaga is rated as a very high offensive tackle with a shorter than average reach. I'm not comparing the two because I think, to answer your question, I think Barton is more destined for interior offensive line play. I think at the end of the day, that is where it is. I think his versatility is just going to make that easier for coaches to make that decision. But it's this argument right here of why when you go to Fuaga and when we're talking the elite tier, it's like there are concerns there in measurables that it's like, I don't know how much I can trust him if we're talking about him being in the ranks of Fushanu and Joe Alt. Like they are not in the same thing because as you brought up with Fushanu just needs to work on a technique thing. He needs to work on how to play. Technically, it's half of the game, but in his eyes at least. But at the same time, it's something that can be taught. He has the measurables, he has elite pass blocking ability and all that kind of stuff, right? His technique in that regard is phenomenal. Joe Alt is just a freak of all freaks when it comes to offensive line play. I mean, how you run a 5 flat at 6'9" and 321 pounds, it's just what the hell. But then we get into this conversation where we're looking at someone's reach, we're looking at things, is it going to translate, all that stuff. That is where you start to nitpick a little bit in this elite class that it will be fascinating come draft day, Josh. I promise you this. I am going to have a lot of fun. I think truly I could probably feel more comfortable how the top 10 receivers are going to be drafted compared to the top 10 offensive tackles. And I think that's a good thing for tackles. I just think
Mm-hmm.
that there's a lot of depth and complexion to the tackle class or offensive line class in general coming into this draft. There is a lot to like. There's a lot of guys that kind of check different boxes in a way at an elite level, at a very good level, so on and so forth. That the Graham Barton conversation, if Graham Barton somehow falls, I think he's going to fall into the day 2. But I'm going to put that there. That's the line I have drawn. I think let's see. Graham Barton, I think Troy Fautanu out of Washington, he's a day 2 guy, early day 2 guy.
Oh, you have
Tyler
him as
Guyton,
day 2 also? Okay.
yeah, yeah. And then Tyler Guyton's kind of the last one I've slid in. I can see Fautanu being a first, like say pick 31 kind of deal. Like he,
Mm-hmm.
just somehow you want to get him there rather than let him fall to the reshuffle. But overall, I think Graham Barton's kind of the first I really would believe falls to day 2. And realistically, I'd probably have him, let's say inside the top 12 picks of day 2, because eventually someone's going to be, when the reshuffle happens, well, this guy has tackle experience, but also maybe we can move him around interior. He's got experience there as well. We'll see what we can do with him. There's a versatile situation with him that he's played at a high end. He has a lot of good tape out there, and we'll just figure it out with him because he feels like he should be able to fill an NFL role, Josh. It's just questions on where that could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the tricky part. When somebody's versatile, it's like, okay, but are you great at anything? I can find guys to be decent at almost anything you can do, but I need somebody that can be great enough to start for me. It's going to be fun to watch. I love what Aaron Kromer has done for the Bills offensive line these last 2 years. When you look at in their second year with Kromer, Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown have career years. You see how he turned Osai. I mean, Torrance was a good prospect, but he turned him into a very solid starter. Connor McGovern had the best year of his career under Cromer. Um, it's not just these big names at the top of the draft. I think there is a lot of talent in this draft. Um, Unpolished potential players, freak athletes. Let Cromer get his hands on them. The Bills right now, I think, are putting a lot of trust in guys like Alec Anderson and Ryan Vandemark. Give him some guys that maybe come with a little bit more pedigree than those guys. While you have Aaron Cromer as your offensive line coach, go ahead and feed as many players as you can to that pipeline. I think there's a very good chance that offensive line is a position the Bills address early if they're not as confident in the long term of Spencer Brown. But I also think there's a world where they could feel really good about what they already have in house and they don't prioritize it. And they maybe just only take it if it sticks out on their board. So I think, Luka, the lesson we've learned since we've now covered the offensive side of the ball is it feels like wide receiver is kind of on an island for the offensive positions when you factor in need. And I think that was before the Diggs trade. Now, after the Diggs trade, it's on an island on the entire roster. I don't think that's the case for the defensive side of the ball. I think there are some positions where when you look under the hood of this Bills roster, that after 2024, it gets kind of bleak. And you want to make sure that the pipeline is filled so you aren't scrambling for starters in free agency next year where you will almost certainly overspend. And I am looking forward to on the next edition of Bill's Chat Pod talking about all the defensive prospects in this draft because while it was kind of hard, honestly, on this offensive side to really talk myself into anybody over what I think will be decent enough value at wide receiver, there are going to be tough conversations, Luka, with some of these defensive prospects in this class at positions that it might seem like the Bills are in good shape at, but I think the Bills have some sneaky needs on that side of the ball.
Yeah, defense. It's funny. So this draft is understandably, we'll call it national media wise and just interest wise, very offensive heavy. The quarterback conversation is going to drive all conversation going right up into the draft because there's an unknown of how many are going to go in a row at the top and who's going to go where and how many teams are going to even move up or try to move up, like Minnesota, of course. Everyone keeps highlighting, so on and so forth. And then you have all these tackles we just talked about, all that. The defensive side of the ball in this draft is a fun one because guys like, I mean, we've seen the mocks out there. We've seen people talk about Latu. Like, that's an edge defender that goes top 12, top 10 every other year, it feels like. And yet you have people realistically, somehow, some way, having him end up on the Bills at 28. I don't actually think that's feasible for what it's worth. He will be top 22, top 20. He's going to get, at some point, his value will be understood and he will be taken. That is going to happen. But you have your, there's still plenty of guys in the defensive side of the ball that are just going to go under the radar only due to all this offensive conversation that when it comes to the Bills, I understand the receiver need and want and desire and most likely scenario where they take. But if that world in that scenario does not work out, as you pointed out and highlighted, you need to fill the roster out appropriately on the defensive side because in the future, which is what you're drafting for, there are going to be a lot of sneaky needs for this roster that you need to fill those gaps when you can. And there's an opportunity that potentially could be there for you in this draft where guys who would be taken a lot higher, depending if it's a first round guy, a second round guy, so on and so forth, that somehow trickle their way down and you are getting a much higher end prospect where you're picking than you would any other year on that side of the ball just because of how this draft is going to work out. So it is going to be a fun conversation when we do that one for the next episode of our 2024 prospect chat series that I've kind of named it.
I'm excited to get into it because I think there are an uncomfortable amount of needs for the Bills on that side of the ball. I think the frontline players look really good on that side of the ball. But they lost a lot of experience on that team this offseason. And, outside of, Terrell Bernard, Ed Oliver, Matt Milano, Christian Benford, who, as much as we love, has not shown the ability to stay healthy for a full calendar season yet. There are some question marks on that team, and I think that even includes guys like Greg Rousseau, who we've been really high on. So it'll be fascinating to see what the Bills do, and we will start to map out that blueprint next week on Bills Chat Podcast. Luka, it's been fun to talk about offense, but we are going to talk about defense next week. And hopefully we won't have to spend the next 45 minutes the first 45 minutes talking about another superstar the Bills trade away. Who could that even be at this point? Your guess is as good as mine. How many superstars are left on this team? That is a conversation for another day. And that other day will be next week, next Monday, not that conversation, the defensive conversation. Thanks again for tuning into Bills Chat. We had a little bit of everything today's episode. We had some WrestleMania reaction. We talked a lot about Stefon Diggs. We talked about offensive players. For Luka, I am Josh McCarty. We will see you next time on Bills Chat.